If you're in the rating range between 1200 and 1600, then congrats! You're already better than a big chunk of players. And if you're rated around 1500, you're even better than 90% of the users on chess.com. So that is pretty good. But obviously, you want to improve, right? Well, today I'm going to be telling you exactly what you need to do and think about if you want to go from being a 1200 to 1600 player, but also if you want to become better than a 1600 player and maybe start aiming towards that 18, 19, maybe even 2000 rating goal that would pretty much be considered an expert in chess. I'll be playing two 5+5 blitz games, and I'll be talking you through every single move that I do and tell you what it is that my opponents are doing wrong. At this level, what we see a lot of times is that people don't make one move blunders. I mean, I'm playing right now against the 1400 player. Of course, they can do a one-move blunder, but those happen a lot more rarely than what they happen at, lower rating or lower levels. Like for instance, when I did my under 800 video or the under 1200 video, those mistakes happen a lot less often here. So I think that a lot of the times the way that you win here is by trying to outplay your opponent and trying to create winning chances, which I'll be telling you how to do. So my opponent is right now, I mean, it's sort of like London bishop, but it's not in London because the pawn is on c4. So this is a queen's gambit that we're seeing. I'm simply going to go ahead and develop my pieces. And now my opponent is going c5, which actually is typically not really considered to be that good because at some point I might be able to break the center with going e5, and then this pawn might become a bit of a weakness. So I have a few different things that I can do. I can go b6, but then my opponent might go ahead and go b4. So I'm simply going to develop this knight immediately. What my opponent is trying to do is that they're trying to lock my bishop in over here on c8 and make sure that I can't really move it. But I mean, I will be able to later on. So like we said, if b6, probably my opponent is going to go b4. So I'm just simply going to go ahead and develop my pieces, and I'm going to prepare this break so that I can do it a little bit later. So now my opponent went h3 because they wanted to be able, after knight h5, they wanted to be able to keep this bishop by going bishop h2. So I'm seeing that, my opponent is right now playing with plans. They probably know this opening, and that is good. You should know openings at this level, not 30 moves in depth, crazy, crazy tactical stuff. No, you should know your opening. You should have a couple openings that you like playing, and you should know the ideas of those openings. And if you don't really have that, then there's plenty of videos on YouTube that can help you out. Knight f3. Okay, so I have now developed pretty much all of my pieces apart from this bishop, so I need to figure out a way to develop this bishop. Now, like I said before, I want to go e5, but maybe right now is not the right time to do it. So what I'm going to do is, let's see, do I do this? I want to go knight over here so that I can maybe after go f6 and e5, but I also like the idea of going rook e8, knight f6, and then knight g6. I like both of those ideas. So let's see, I think actually I'm going to go knight e4 before I can't do it. Because if captures right now, this knight will have to move, and after f5, I might be able at some point to go bishop f6 and then try to go e5. Or I can go knight f6 and then place a knight on d5 and then later on play for this. So we're seeing now that my opponent is going b4, and now at some point my opponent might want to go b5 to try to break this pawn for this one. So I could go a6, but at the same time, I don't really like the idea that, that this square becomes so weak and that if I ever go b6, I cannot capture back with a pawn. So I don't really like that. So what I'm going to do is that I'm simply going to place my knight in the square where I want it to go to. This square on d5 is now really amazing because it's an outpost for the knight. We can even see now that I'm threatening to go knight c3 at some point, which I maybe can do even now. I mean, if this bishop moves now, I can go knight c3. This knight over here is a fantastic piece. So now this is a mistake. This move a3 is a mistake. Why? Because, okay, I have two options. The first one that I can do is that I can capture this bishop, and after pawn captures, I can capture this pawn. And I have won a pawn by doing that, which is pretty amazing. I mean, actually, that would just be really, really good. So that is the first option, but I can also go knight c3 over here, and I'm threatening the queen, and when the queen moves, I'll be able to capture this bishop, and the king will have to capture it back, which means that my opponent will not be able to castle, which is also pretty good. So this move, actually, my opponent didn't realize that, my opponent, by going b4 and going for this whole idea, didn't realize that I had this really good plan of going knight d5 and then knight c3. I mean, they went here because they wanted to defend the pawn, but I think going something like queen b3 instead would have been better to stop knight c3. But I think now that I'll be capturing here, and then I'll just capture this pawn, and I have now won a pawn in the opening. So knight b3, my opponent is right now simply saying that they want to exchange queens, which actually I don't have anything against. I mean, I have a couple different options. I can choose if I want to exchange queens or if I want to go maybe for queen c3 check. Once again, I mean, keep still at this level. You want to go always analyzing the checks, captures, and attacks. I've done a whole video about that, but it's still super important at this level to do that. So I think actually I'm going to go for this check because I'm realizing that if the queen blocks this check, then the knight is hanging, so I can capture it. And if the knight goes back, then, you know, my opponent has wasted a tempo. And if the king goes to f1, then, okay, the king won't be able to castle, which is what's happening. So now I'm going to go ahead and activate my rook. I want to activate all my pieces. And yes, this bishop is still the issue that I have over here. But now it's going to be easier for me to go b6 and then maybe bishop b7. So queen b1, and I need to make a choice. Do I want to go bishop d7, bishop e8, bishop f7? This is definitely a plan that I could go for. Or do I want to go something like b6 and then bishop b7? I think actually that I'm going to go for this plan of bishop d7, bishop e8, bishop f7 because I think that this is going to take a little bit too long, and I'm actually not sad about placing my bishop here because I think the bishop is going to be pretty useful in this diagonal. So now I've been able to connect my rooks. Yes, I spent a lot of time developing my bishop, but we need to have all our pieces playing. Finally now, I have all of my pieces playing. All my pieces are developed, and now I can be ready. I mean, we've already been in the middle game, but I can really start thinking about what I want to do and how to improve this middle game. So once again, okay, I'm going to be looking at checks, captures, and attacks over here. So I'm saying that when my opponent went to to a5, this knight is threatening this pawn on b7. So if I move to b6, then this pawn over here is going to be hanging, and then there's going to be a fork on my rook and my bishop, and I really don't like that. So I have a few different options. First option that I have is to go bishop f6, simply to threaten to capture this rook, because if the rook goes here to a2, then I might be able to push and then threaten this rook. That is option number one. But actually, there's another option which I like more, which is to start by going rook over here, threatening this bishop. The idea simply being that this bishop doesn't have a lot of places to go to. We can see that, you know, most places are squares that are right now protected by one of my pieces. And I'm stopping right now the knight from capturing up b7, as this is under attack, but also the rook now is never going to be hanging after knight takes b7. So after this, I can maybe go bishop f6 and then threaten this rook, and I'm also sort of taking away this square for the rook with my rook over here, because after captures and captures, I would have this move. So my opponent went queen over here, defending the bishop, and now if the rook moves, then we can also see that my queen is going to be hanging. So I do not really like that. So let's go ahead and see what I choose to do. I think I'm going to go bishop f6, simply because I want to be defending my queen, but I also want to threaten this rook. So now probably my opponent will go something like this to threaten my queen, and that will be okay. I will simply move my queen somewhere else, maybe queen over here. And I don't really mind my opponent capturing this pawn, because this pawn is actually pretty far away. If I can create threats at the same time as my opponent is capturing this pawn, it doesn't really matter, simply because, like I said, the pawn is just simply so far away from all the action. The action right now is happening in the center. I think rook c1 is the best move. And okay, now I need to move my queen. I could go queen here, but now I'm actually seeing that this might be a better move, because I will be threatening to capture this bishop, but the issue is that there might be knight over here, which I'm not sure I am a big fan about. So I'm simply going to go queen over here, because I think it became a little bit too complicated. So this king is over here. After knight takes there, I definitely want to be opening up my pieces. I want to open up for this bishop, and I want to break the center. It is time now to finally do so. So yes, my opponent might be able to go knight d6 at some point, but I'll be able to place this bishop on d5, and my bishop is gonna get really good. Okay, guys, did I get into time trouble again? Yes, but I mean, Anna Cramling and time trouble are two words that always go with each other. Yeah, like I said, I do recommend you guys to play rapid at this level. 15 plus 10 games I think are perfect, but let's see. Actually, the move that I'm going to do is that I'm going to go bishop over here. This is the move that I'm going to do to go for this check. After knight takes, there's this check, and there are now going to be a lot of tactics going on here. I don't want to allow knight takes f7 because after this, the king will be able to capture back, and then the king will be very weak. This bishop might be able to come up to c4, and the king will be very weak, and I'm not really a big fan of that. So, after knight here, I have this check, which was my idea. We're gonna see where this king goes. If the king goes somewhere random, I might have queen over here. So we got f3 right now, and now I think a good move is to go queen here. Bishop takes is not possible due to the pin, so I'm threatening right now both this knight and this bishop, and there's no way to defend both from what I'm seeing at least. So this pawn is also defending my rook, so everything is under attack, and I think I got a really good position. Yeah, I'm even wondering if there might have been bishop captures here before, forcing king captures. Maybe the king could have moved, and I'm not sure I like that. So I think this move is good, threatening two pieces at the same time. There's a bit of a fork, and we're saying now that, I mean, my opponent has played really well, like this game, but okay, they're gonna lose a piece now. I'll be able to capture over here. They've been playing really well, but it's been a little bit of more complicated tactics that have made them fall. And also in the opening, being so focused on this a3, b4 plan that they sort of forgot to develop all their pieces in castle. And I was able to win this pawn in the opening. So those have been the biggest mistakes that my opponent has done. But definitely a big difference from, you know, the under 1200 games that we've been seeing in the past, or the under 800 games. You can see a big difference here in the level of the players. So I know that, for instance, against this opponent, if I would give up a knight or something, I mean, then the game would, I mean, not be completely over, but it would be really, really hard to get any counter chances because players at this level are very solid. So rook over here, and I'm going to go ahead and capture this pawn as I'm now activating this bishop, and now we're seeing that my opponent is falling for another tactic. They were thinking so much about me first capturing this pawn and capturing back that they didn't even see that the rook was hanging. So I'm now going to be able to capture over here. This is a check, and let's go ahead and see. I think I can capture this pawn as well. After captures, I can just take this back, and then this will be a checkmate after I capture over there. So I think this is now going to be completely resignable for my opponent. So let's go ahead and make this the easy way. I'm going to start with this check. And after this, I'm going to go for this rook check, and this is now just going to be a checkmate. So here we go. We ended up winning this game. So let me go ahead and go back to the moments where I really think that my opponent blundered the most. I think it started going down in this position for my opponent as they went knight d2 instead of knight e5. Now, there might seem like there isn't really any big difference, but knight e5 is actually a much better move because this knight right here is one of my best pieces. It doesn't look like it yet, but whenever this knight gets up to d5, like we saw later on, this knight is going to become a monster. And because of my pawn structure, because my pawn here is blocking white from ever going e4, and this pawn has advanced so much and gone all the way to c5, this square right here is going to be a fantastic outpost for my knight, which means that it's a square where there's no other pawn that can kick it away. So I think that a higher rated player would have understood that it's crucial to exchange this knight for this one. Now, for instance, if knight e5, if I would go now knight f6, the big difference that we have over here is that now this knight cannot freely roam around wherever it wants to because this knight is not going to be acting as a defender to this pawn. One, you can also go bishop g5 and maybe try to get rid of this knight or whatever, but you can also perhaps go queen c2 or something so that if knight d5, this pawn is hanging. So those are some of the different options that you can go for now, but this would be a much more active position than, you know, with the knight on d2. Also, if white wants to go for this whole b4, b5 plan, which it seemed like they wanted to in the game as they went b4, this is a very common way, you know, for white to try to have black get a really weak pawn here on the queen side, then this knight is going to be much better placed here because it's going to be sort of attacking this pawn after white's pawn has been able to reach b5. So this knight is much more active over here. So the seemingly not so bad move knight d2 actually makes white get a much more passive position, and I think that this is something that if, you know, my opponent was higher rated, they would have realized. What we can take from this game is, I think, a lot positional chess, actually. It started out with me outplaying them positionally, and then I start creating a lot of attacks, and then they just weren't able to hold all of those attacks together. So let's go now for game number 2. Okay, I'm getting the black pieces again, but this is against the 1576, so that is good. It's a pretty high-rated opponent. So my opponent is going e4, and I'm going to go c5. Is c5 an opening that I recommend at this level? I think that this is kind of where you can start playing it. I think before you're 1600, it's no, but when you start becoming 16, 1700, I don't think there's anything bad in starting to study openings such as the Sicilian. So my opponent is now going for c4, and the idea of this move is that white is basically stopping black from going d5. A lot of times we say in the Sicilian that if black is able to go d5, black has already equalized. So the idea is to stop black from going here, and what is the issue with it? Well, that this square might become a bit of a weakness. So now that I've gone e6, I don't really want to go g6 because then my dark squares are going to become very, very weak. So what I'm simply going to do is that I'm going to go d6, knight f6, bishop e7, and castle. I'm just going to develop quickly. After d4, I need to capture over here because otherwise my opponent is going to get too good of a center. And I'm now going to go knight f6. Bishop e7, like I said. Maybe I'll even go a6 to stop white from getting a good knight over here. And now that my opponent is going g3, I'm actually a little bit surprised about this move because this pawn can sometimes become a little bit weak after this. I'm already looking at moves such as knight e5, but maybe this move doesn't really work here. Obviously, I'm constantly looking at what happens if I would capture, but I don't want to capture because my knight is really well placed here. So for now, I'm just going to develop my bishop. After bishop g2, I suppose one plan might be to go captures, and then to push because this pawn will be a big weakness, and this bishop is now going to be really strong in this diagonal. So I need to think about here if I want to block this bishop by going something like e5. A lot of times what we want to do is that we want to block bishops because bishops are really good when they're in an open diagonal. And sometimes white can even sacrifice a pawn here to open up this bishop, and I'm wondering if I want to avoid that. Now, the bad thing about going here is that this square is going to become a big weakness for me, but my bishop will be able to get out. I'm blocking this bishop, and the question is if knight f5 is a strong move over here. That is the main question, and as after captures and captures, my opponent will be getting this really strong diagonal that they wanted before. At the same time, I'll be getting this nice square for my knight, and I'm wondering, therefore, positionally, what is the best thing to do? And actually, I've come to a realization that I think that I want to capture over here, and after queen takes, I want to capture here. So I want to go for the same idea as I was talking about before, but I simply just don't want to allow knight f5. So that is why I'm doing it this way. At first, I didn't think I wanted to capture here, but I came to a realization that I want to do it because I just don't want this bishop to become active, and I think that after something like bishop e6, I think this is a good move. After bishop e6, rook c8, I actually quite like my position here. I might even be able to go knight d7, knight c5, and f5. So I'm going to castle before anything else. We want to remain safe. And after castles, now it's going to be time for me to start thinking about what I want to do. So h4 is a very common move that I think that a lot of players do, but this is a mistake. This is not a good move. In these positions, a lot of times white wants to go f4, not h4. Why does white want to go f4? To basically ask my center what I'm going to do. And if I don't do anything, maybe even go f5 and try to get some space on the king side. Now, going h4 is a mistake because you're now saying that you're never going to go f4, because if white now goes f4, this pawn on g3 is going to become a huge weakness. You don't want to do that. So h4, this pawn actually doesn't have any future. I mean, h5, I'll be able to capture it. This actually is a terrible move. This pawn doesn't have any future, and there's actually no reason behind it. But I see a lot of people doing these moves because they think that, you know, they might do something, or they've seen strong players going h4 or whatever. But yeah, this is not a good move. I'm going to go rook c8 simply to put pressure on this pawn. And I think actually knight up was the best choice. My opponent went for b3. And now we can see that my rook is indirectly looking a little bit towards the knight. So I know here that at some point there may be a few tactical ideas. But I'm going to go for the plan that I said before of going knight d7 and then knight c5. Because this pawn in b3 now has the job of defending this pawn doesn't really ever want to go to b4 because then it's not going to be defending this pawn anymore. So this pawn is a little bit stuck on b3 now. So my opponent is going bishop c5, which I think is good. And now comes the question of how I want to proceed. Do I want to go knight c5 and allow these takes? I actually don't really think I do, because then I would be giving this square for white, which I'm not really happy about. Do I want to go f5? Maybe I do, but maybe before I do that, I want to have my queen on c7 to defend this pawn. Other questions, do I want to go a6 now? Maybe, but then this square is going to become a weakness. Whenever we move a pawn, this square that the pawn was defending becomes a weakness. So I really like the idea of going f5 and then f4, because now I'm going to be playing a little bit towards this pawn. So like I said, I want to create weaknesses in this position. And after f5, the only thing that's holding back is that I think that this square is going to become really good for white. And I'm not really so happy about that. So let's go ahead and see what I want to do. Okay. So I've decided to go a6. The idea of this is that I don't want this knight to be able to come up over here. And I think now a pretty good plan for my opponent would be to go knight d5. But okay, my opponent is starting by going rook over here, and there's nothing really wrong with that necessarily. And now, once again, I have a few different options. One option is maybe at some point to go b5, but not yet, because this isn't really under attack. I think that what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go queen c7. And the idea of going a6 was that I wanted to stop the knight from coming up over here so that I could go queen c7. I think really that my opponent needs to go knight d5 soon. I think that's going to be the best plan that they have. But after knight d5, I'll be capturing. That's why my bishop is here. It's really important that I can capture, because otherwise this knight is just going to be way too strong. So I need to capture this, and then I'm going to try to go knight c5, but I actually want to capture with the queen. I don't want to capture with the pawn. And now my opponent's going f4. And this is what I was saying. I knew that my opponent at some point would want to go f4, but now this pawn is going to become a very big weakness. So now it's time for me to go knight c5. If captures, I'll be able to capture back with check. And after this, there we go, I'll be even able to go b5. And now we're going to start, now we're going to start rolling. So there's a check, the king has to move, and now I'm going to go b5. What is the idea? The idea is that if captures, I'm winning this knight. And otherwise, I'm getting a lot of space here on the queen side, and I want to be able to capture here on c4. So actually, now I think I'm better. In fact, I think I'm quite a lot better here now in this position. If f5, I can capture here first and then capture back. So this game, we can see, has been a lot about, my opponent has played really solidly, but it's been about these sort of small minor mistakes that they've done positionally. I think now, I don't know if my opponent has realized that I can capture here. And even if now the queen would move, I could capture here, because if I capture this bishop, I can capture the knight. So yeah, I think that this is good, and this just becomes a little mix of both positional chess, but also a little bit of tactical. Because I don't want to move my bishop, because if I move my bishop, the knight is going to come up over here, and I think my opponent is going to get a pretty nice, really nice square actually. So I'm even capturing here. Now, for instance, something like knight a4, I can go queen over here. And now finally opponent took there, so I'll be capturing this knight. And after pawn takes f7, I need to make a choice. I need to figure out if I want to capture back or if I want to go something like king h8, which might look very strange. Okay, I think I want to capture back here. I think I want to capture back, but I really had to take a moment because my king is going to be right in the center. My king is going to be pretty unsafe. So I need to make sure that there are no tactics in that position. Now this move is a move that I do not fully understand. I'm going to go ahead and capture here. And now my opponent simply blundered a queen. So by going queen a6, the idea was that my rook was hanging, but my rook was defended by the queen. And now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be capturing another pawn. And we're going to go ahead and defend this. I'm going to go queen b2, and I'm going to take control of the promotion square, and I'm going to be promoting the next move is the idea. So this is now just completely winning for me. I'll be making another queen. And now I can even capture here. And now my opponent is resigning. Whoops. So what was it that went wrong in this game? My opponent played seemingly a very solid game. Honestly, this was a very, very, very solid game. But I think it all started going wrong when my opponent went h4 because they didn't understand that if they go h4, they're not really going to be able to go f4 later on. So it felt like this was a move that just looks good, but that it's not really. There's no depth in it. There's no plan behind it. It just looks good to the eye. So rook c8 and b3, and now I started rerouting my pieces, bishop e3. My opponent really was playing well here. Like, this is really, like, all of these moves were good. But I constantly had a plan, and I think that one of their biggest mistakes was over here when they went f4. It felt like they kind of didn't really understand their middle game plans. Here they should have gone knight d5 and just kind of figure out how they wanted their pieces to be. Let's go ahead and say that they go knight d5 over here. I have to capture because otherwise the knight is going to be way too strong. And I think over here there's a few different ways that you can play this. You can either capture like this, or you can capture with the queen. But if you capture with the queen, the plan is going to be to go f4, but now this is going to be, maybe you can do it, but it's going to be a bit strange as you're never going to be able to capture back with the pawn, as this pawn is going to be a weakness. So that's going to be a little bit hard. You don't really want to capture with the e-pawn because I'll be able to go e5 and get some counterplay in the center. So let's say that you capture like this. Then, I mean, I think that my opponent just had to realize that this was a little bit favorable for them because in the endgames, they're going to have the bishop pair, and my pawns are on dark squares over here. My bishop is a dark squared bishop, so my pawns are going to be, my bishop is actually going to be really bad because it's going to be basically stuck by these pawns. So I think that my opponent just didn't realize positionally what they're doing, and I think that if they would have been a little bit higher rated, what they would have done is that they would have understood that these are the pieces I want to exchange. This is the pawn structure I want to have in the endgame, and that is why I need to go knight d5. Because this is really a favorable endgame for white. It may not look like it. Let's say that there's like a big chunk of exchanges. Let's say that there's just like all of these exchanges. To say that there are all of these exchanges. I mean, if rook takes a2 now, I think there's rook over here winning a piece, so you can't do that. So let's say that we have this endgame position. This is actually a little bit favorable for white because you're going to be able to go bishop a3 and you're going to be able to put a lot of pressure on this pawn, and the two bishops are together going to coordinate like really well. So I think that if it was a stronger player playing, this is what they would have gone for. They would have gone for this endgame, and they would have understood that this was better for them, and they would have tried to outplay their opponents in this endgame. So, but I don't think my opponent realized that. I think that my opponent was just going for plans they didn't really calculate, because this, like I said, this position would be much better than this. So f4, and here I went knight c5, and I think also that capturing here was just a big mistake. This bishop is one of the best pieces that white has. This bishop is really strong, and I don't think they want to get rid of this knight. I think here it would have been much better to simply move the queen and just ask me, what is it that your knight is doing over here? Because then all the ideas of going maybe f5, etc. would still exist. So actually, if my opponent would have gone queen e2, I think that would have been better. But my opponent decided to exchange, and now they started exchanging the wrong things, I think. And after b5 and f5, I'm not sure if they saw this. And after queen e2, I was simply able to capture. And yeah, this actually became now a pretty equal position. But this was, I think, also a mistake. I think they had to capture here and, at least have, when I'm a pawn up, at least have my king get to the center. And then after the exchanges, I mean, my opponent just did one move that was just terrible, which was that they sacrificed the queen. They gave up the queen. So actually, this happened in the other game as well, that as soon as my opponent wasn't able to continue with the plans that they wanted to, they just blundered a piece and lost the game like 2 moves after. So yeah, I hope that it helps you guys to see what my thought process has been throughout these 2 games. I hope that you guys enjoy this one. Good luck on all your chess endeavors, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Take care.